Okay, so welcome and thanks for taking a look at this root tagging GUI that we made. I'm just going to share my screen here so you can see what I'm looking at. All right, so we made a root tagging GUI so that we can start to measure and better understand how roots of corn plants, specifically these things called brace roots, affect the plant's stability. So specifically, we're looking at how the geometry of these roots might, maybe the root thickness, for example, affect the stability of that plant. Now, we made this GUI because takes quite a lot of time to use off-the-shelf tagging software to get these measurements. And I have to give the credit here to our student, Will Cantera, who spent a lot of time working on this and getting this going pretty smooth. So you're going to start with a bunch of images. So this might be an entire field season of images, for example. So there's a ton of them here. And you want to add those images in this root tagging GUI folder. There's something called stock images. And maybe we can just grab 1292 and take some of these plants. And it's nice to do it in groups because, as we'll see, if you do make a mistake in the GUI, then you have to go back and edit the logging or the data logging CSV file. So maybe I'll just grab, maybe I'll just grab all of them for now, right? So I'll paste them in here. And once they're pasted in there, this GUI is going to run from the main.py. And main.py, you really want to run this on a computer that has a good pixel ratio comparatively to the image data. So this is a 4K screen, so you're going to see pretty high quality images will come up nicely on the screen. But I will say that some of the text and stuff, it does change depending on which type of monitor you're using. So here you can see some of the things got cut off. And that's just because we did some of these things pixel-wise or ratio-wise. So this is the first image in the folder. And we put labels here, which are 1/2 inch tall, so that we could get a pixels per inch or inches per pixel ratio. And when you tag this stuff, you want to make sure that you're doing it perpendicular to the surface of the label, the edge of the label. So, for example, you'd want to do this. So you can see the line that would connect these two dots is perpendicular to the tangent line at the top of this label. And that's because we're really trying to get the number of pixels that correspond to that 1/2 inch height. Okay, so the image scale is the first thing, and you can see the mode kind of got cut off here, but when we hit enter, you'll see the mode pops up to the top, and the image scale, about 60 pixels, is going to get logged here. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is count the brace roots. And as it says here, you're going to start at the lowest level, and that's going to correspond to the lowest input box. Some of the things do get occluded. So for example, for this plant, I would say this is 1 brace root coming out here, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so there's 5 brace roots on the bottom. And then on the top, we would call this a partial whorl because we only have these 3 roots coming down. So I'm still going to count it, but later we won't use that to get the root geometry. All right, so I've got the brace roots. Now for the width, I'm going to use the lowest complete whorl, and of course these are kind of occluded, so I can't really get a good width there, but I can get a good width across this one. And it's similarly to the label, we want to be perpendicular to whatever that tangent line would be. So we're getting the pixels wide. If we did this at an angle or something, then we wouldn't really be getting the width, we would be getting some other measurement. Okay, so that's your brace root width. Now you're getting the stalk width, and try to do it right across the middle here. Okay. And now this is the part where we don't want to count these partial whorls. So this is what I'm going to call the root here is coming down this way. and we're getting this angle, and we also want to get the point where it's hitting the ground and the height of that. And keep in mind that we're looking at kind of a plane that would be slicing this plant in half. So if you see some roots that are in the back portion, you wouldn't want to tag those. For example, like this one's in the front portion, but if there was one right behind it, you wouldn't want to tag, you wouldn't want to use that for the triangle. Okay, so it looks like this is probably part of the leaf, and the root is here. We're going to go down and make a nice right triangle here, just kind of following that root. And on this, in the same way, this is like maybe a bump from the root in the back, and this one is kind of coming up this way. So I'm going to click here, and then we want to get the point where it's hitting the ground. So I'm going to drop this right like that. All right, and if we hit enter, it says we're done, and we can go to the next plan. Okay, so some of the images do look like this, but as long as you can still count these roots and get these measurements, it's really okay. One thing I'll say is it's a little bit harder to use this number here to check the label, but I can make out that this is the B side, and based on these roots coming in the back, I can kind of see that that is the same plant, because we do have an A side and a B side to every plant. Okay, so again, image scale. So I'm going to go here, and let's intentionally, maybe we make a mistake intentionally now so that you can see what happens if I screw up. Now, if I screw up on a B side plant, you're going to see I have to restart on the A side. So I'm going to have to redo that A side again. So say I was trying to go super fast, I ended up getting a diagonal line here. Now that's it's obviously not good. So if I do that, then I'm going to want to cancel out and redo this. And you don't have to redo every plant. So if you had just done the first 9 plants and now you're on the 10th plant and you messed this up, you'd restart by deleting the images that you had tagged before in your stock images folder. And so like if you went in here and you screwed up on the 9th plant or the 10th plant, you could delete all these other images here, and then it would just restart from the next one. But if you messed up on the B plant, you wouldn't delete the A. You'd leave the A as well, and we're going to redo that one. Now this will just give you an idea of what this output is. So the main.py running that RootTaggingGUI, it gives you something called pixel data. And here we ended before we hit next in the GUI, so it didn't even pull up a 1B. But this gives you an idea of what the data looks like, and you can see all the fields are filled in. We only got the 2 roots here, 2 brace root whorls. Yeah, and now when we run this again, what's going to happen is a new header is going to come up, and we're going to be replacing this 1A. Okay. And if you didn't do that, what would happen is all the numbering would get messed up, and you'd kind of be out of order here as you went through the tagging. So make sure you always start with an A plant. All right, so let's just rerun the main.py. Start, that same image is going to come up, and once you know how to do it, you can kind of go through it a little faster. Brace root count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 3 on the top, partial, brace root width, and you'd want to do the leftmost one. This is just the leftmost one that we can see. Okay, stock width. And then when you hit next, that's what's saving that data. That's why we didn't get a B data set last time. All right, now we're on B. Let's do it correctly this time. Now we counted this one on the back. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then this one's also in the back. So we got 5 here. Okay, and then these guys are also in the back, so we're not going to count any of those. right, brace root width. So the leftmost world that we counted was this one. Stalk width. Now we're going to draw these triangles. Okay. So we got this one on the back. This is the one that we're doing on the front here. And this one's a little tricky because it's just this guy. All right. And when you hit next, it's just going to go to the next plant. It's going to do that until all the images are used in the folder. But we're just going to skip that for the purpose of this tutorial and go back to this pixel data. All right, so we tagged the same plant. So, I mean, ideally, these would all be exactly the same numbers, but you can see there are some variations, and probably there would be variations even if you went out there with the tape measure, but I'd say it does help if you're using a mouse for this because it's a lot easier to click around. But you don't want two A's, right? So, and this would happen every time you restart. So every time you mess up, you're going to have to get rid of this header. So there's a little bit of post-processing to do. And it's good because it makes you really look at the data set and make sure everything's looking good. So here, we're going to get rid of the top portion and yes. Okay, so now we have one plant worth of data, and you'd have many, many plants here, right? So if you had 10 plants, you'd have 1292. This would be like 2A, 2B, etc., up until 10A, 10B. So you'd have 20 lines of data here. So now this data is relative to pixel count. And what we want is we want the data relative to some inches or meters. And in our case, we measured the label at 1/2 inch, and we know the label height, so that means we can get a pixels per inch ratio. And that's exactly what happens and you're going to save not in the ODF, but in the CSV format. So that's exactly what happens in this process root pixel data. It gives us an output, just like this gave us the pixel data.csv. This is going to give us an output that is processed. And before we process the data, it's useful to make an exceptions.txt. And this doesn't come with the package, but it's nice to keep some notes. So for example, in our stock images, we saw that 1292 had a partial. So we might want to say 1292 plant 1, and maybe give a note that says partial second whorl. And that's just so that we can go back later, and if we wanted to check if there was any weird things going on. So maybe one of the images is so blurry you can't tag it. You'd want to add that note here, and that'll just make processing the entire data set, 4,000 images, a lot nicer because we'll be able to look at this list. So I would save that. And all right, so let's go back and run this process root pixel. It's the same thing. You're just going to type in that. You can see the path here. The path is the path to this folder, and you're going to type process root pixel data. Okay, and if I hit enter, oh, so this is good. So what I didn't do is I didn't go into this root pixel data and edit the data file. So this is an example of what the data files would look like. For example, this is the output and this is just a placeholder. So we would want to rename this because we could potentially, every time we run this, we're going to get more data. And you don't want to have to go through and have a bunch of headers for different data sets. So every time you do a different plot, so say we did 1293 next, if we just label this as 1292, then every new plot will be its own CSV file, and we can just add them sequentially here. So this one would be 1292, and don't forget to add that file extension. quickly. So if I run this now, you can see that it went through the data, and it does this really quickly, but you can easily see here which plots it processed and the number of files. So that's kind of a good check. Now, what it generated this processed root data.csv. And if you go in there, we can see that here's the plants that we just tagged. And now these, forgive the lack of units here, but we know it's pixels per inch. So we have stalk width and single root width, etc. And this is the measurements that give us useful information, so that Dr. Aaron Sparks can go through this and figure out which characteristics of the plants are going to improve their stability. So that's really all there is to it. At the end, you should have at least 2 things, and if you made an exception, 3 additional documents that appear, and more if you're going to rename these. But that's it, and you're going to replace these every time you do a new set. You're just going to delete these and go back into your folder with all your images. As these, and maybe pick a different image set and copy those, and you paste them in here. And yeah, same process. So hopefully everything works out for this. There's not much more than that to do. So good luck with it. Thanks.